colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this webinar. We are really delighted that you are able to join us. This webinar is organized by the Committee on World Food Security, CFS, with lots of gratitude to our colleagues at WHO and UN Nutrition who have invited us as part of the WHO Health Talks. And this afternoon, this morning, depending on where you are joining us, we will be looking at the newly endorsed CFS Voluntary Guidelines on Food Systems and Nutrition, with a particular focus on how the guidelines can be used to promote healthy diets through sustainable food systems. Just before we kick it off, I would like to remind all our participants, I think the numbers have risen with just over 100, that if you want to ask a question, we invite you to send you a question via chat or Q&A, and we prefer Q&A. You can use the chat function to interact with colleagues, to interact with your friends and partners who are on the line, make new connections, catch up. And before we start, we just want to let you know that we're going to make this session quite interactive. As you can see on the slide that's on the screen, we are going to use menti.com. So we request that you take your phones, Google menti.com, and enter the code that's shown on the screen 12040840. Once you enter that code, you'll get to see a number of questions that we'll be posing to inviting you to engage, interact with us. So to get this started, Martin, if you could stop sharing the screen. Excellent. So I will share my screen just to get a sense of who is joining us today. Where are you joining us from? And so I have a fairly quick poll just to check where you're joining us from today. And I see there's quite a lot of answers coming in. Where are you joining us from is the question. I have seen Indonesia. I've seen, you have it on your screen. Which country are you joining us from today? Nepal, Sweden, Netherlands, USA, Italy, the Danish embassy in Rome, Hungary. Keep polling, keep letting us know where you're joining us from. The conversation is so that it's global. As you know, with the food systems, there are conversations that are going on. We're looking at impacting food systems at all levels. As you might have heard in many places, the food systems, the way they're structured at the moment, are not functioning. They're not delivering the right level of health, both to people and to the environment, hence this conversation. 30 people have told us where they're joining us from today. A lot more still coming on. Please continue giving us a sense of where you're joining us from. I'll stop the sharing screen. Please continue engaging. We want to see the numbers. We want to see the diversity of the people represented on the call this afternoon, this morning. We will structure the call in 3 sections. The first section will get remarks delivered to us by the chair of UN Nutrition, Naoko Yamamoto. She has just taken up that role, and she'll be giving us an overview of the work that UN Nutrition is doing. After her opening remarks, we'll go into a panel discussion that will be anchored by my boss, the Secretary of the Committee on World Food Security, Chris Hegadon. We'll have Francisco Branca from the World Health Organization, who leads the Department of Nutrition and Food Safety. We have Gada Vabag. Gada, is very good to see you, the coordinator of scaling up nutrition, popularly known as SUN movement. We have Ferreo Lema Feyisa, who is a senior advisor, Office of the State Minister, Federal Ministry of Health of Ethiopia. And finally, we have Mary Mpere, who's a chief policy analyst, the SUN technical focal point, and she's also the lead convener, Food Systems Dialogue, and she's joining us all the way from Accra in Ghana. So without further ado, I'll hand the floor to the chair of UN Nutrition to give us her opening remarks. Over to you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you, moderator. Ganjo, is this name when my pronunciation is correct? But thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much to give us the opportunity. So distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen, and colleagues and friends, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm delighted to open this discussion as a chair of UN Nutrition. Let me talk a little bit about UN Nutrition. UN Nutrition was created as a result of the merge of the UN System Standing Committee on Nutrition, UNSCN, and UN Network for the Scale-Up Nutrition Sun movement. It works to overcome fragmentation, increase harmonization of nutrition, and provide a coordinated, aligned support to the government in addressing the preventing malnutrition in all its forms. UN Nutrition also enables the UN to speak with one voice on nutrition. Today we are discussing about the Committee on World Food Security CFS Voluntary Guidelines on Food Systems and Nutrition, formally adopted during the 47th plenary session of the CFS. The guidelines aimed at promoting policy coherence and reducing policy fragmentation between relevant sectors like health, agriculture, education, environment, gender, social protection, trade, and employment, all of which have great influence on the functioning of the food system and their impact on nutrition. These voluntary guidelines have been developed as a follow-up to the second International Conference on Nutrition convened in 2014 and as a concrete contribution to the UN Decade of Action on Nutrition. They are also an important input in the global debate on improving food systems for healthy diet and better nutrition in advance of the 2021, this year's UN Food System Summit, COP26, and the Tokyo Nutrition for Growth Summit 2021. The UN Nutrition strongly supported the development of the voluntary guidelines by providing evidence-based input to the negotiation. This document has been negotiated by all stakeholders, resulted in broader recommendations that will need to be further elaborated into the policy and investment at national level. The member states formally endorse the voluntary guidelines. As the next step, we encourage to use these guidelines in conjunction with specific science and evidence-based normative guidance from the specialized agency constituting the UN Nutrition and beyond. The UN Nutrition will continue to provide this technical support by making available to countries relevant evidence and standards to complement the recommendations presented in the documents. So furthermore, the strength of the UN Nutrition is that to promote interagency collaboration and coordination at both global and at the country level. So for this reason, UN Nutrition is uniquely positioned to support uptake of the voluntary guidelines by mobilizing and coordinating its member agencies in countries. So these voluntary guidelines provide an opportunity for all stakeholders to transform toward more inclusive, sustainable, and resilient food system for healthy diet for all. So they can support the development by developing coherent, coordinated policy and action. Action is the most important that are relevant to national context. As a UN Nutrition, we are united in one cause, the fight against malnutrition in all its forms, to leave no one behind. So let us seize the momentum to transform our food system to provide a sustainable, healthy diet for all. So I think that many our dear partners are going to have a good panel discussion. We are looking for the more interactive discussion for all participants of this webinar. So thank you very much, joining, and thank you very much again. Give me opportunity to talk. So thank you. So back to moderator. Thank you.
Many thanks, Ms. Yamamoto, for your opening remarks, and more importantly, for the support that UN Nutrition has lent to the entire process of developing the guidelines, and even now as we kick off the implementation at the national, regional, and global levels. We are super grateful to you, your secretariat, and to all members of the network. Now we'll turn to Chris Hagedorn, the Secretary of CFS, the Committee on World Food Security, to tell us a little more about why we are here, what the guidelines are about, and how they can be useful in your work.
Fantastic. Thanks, Waiganjo. And Naoko, thank you so much. We knew you weren't Francesco Branca, but I think we've just discovered how Francesco seems to be everywhere at once. So anyway, we know this is a busy week. So thank you especially for taking the time and everyone here today, including Gerda and Francesco, Mary, Faru, and let me thank the team at CFS Secretariat who was responsible for putting this together. And of course, our great friends at WHO, without whom this event would not have been possible. So it's been a great partnership since WHO joined the CFS advisory group back in 2016, thereabouts. And we've been working extremely closely and extremely hard ever since to ensure nutrition is given the importance and the focus it deserves. So we're happy to be here with so many new names and faces, again, from amongst the Geneva policy community. It's a specific goal of ours in the CFS Secretariat to strengthen our ties with you all in Geneva, just as we will do in New York as well, because we recognize that we have to work together. We have to support one another on SDG 2, but on many of the other things that we are all working on. So for those who may be new to the CFS, what it is, it really is a family. It's comprised of member states. It has a civil society and a private sector mechanism, both separate. It's UN agencies, it's research and financial institutions, it's the Special Rapporteur on the Right to Food, and many others. So multi-stakeholder collaboration is at our very core, and it's what makes us unique as the UN's platform for addressing SDG 2. So it's essential that you know who we are, what we do, and how we can connect the dots between the various policy initiatives that you're taking up in Geneva and what we're doing here in Rome and elsewhere around the planet. So I see we have many country delegations. We have reps of CFS high-level panel of experts. That's a critical piece of the CFS family. It's 15 members in a steering committee who provide us with the technical and science background that underpins all of our products. We have CSM representatives, PSM, the civil society and private sector. I haven't seen his face, but we also, I saw in the registration, we have Ambassador Hans Hoogeveen of the Netherlands, who actually led the negotiations, which resulted in the adoption of our voluntary guidelines on food systems and nutrition, and many, many more. So you'll hear a variety of views and opinions, and most importantly, we want to hear from you. We want to have some creative ideas and figure out how we can help you and help us connect the dots between all the various aspects associated with reaching zero hunger and zero malnutrition. So Martin, if you don't mind putting the screens up, and again, thank you for getting those ready. Look, we'll start with some obvious facts. We all know malnutrition in all its forms is on the rise. We all know we're off track to achieving SDG 2. And we know that malnutrition in all its forms, undernutrition, micronutrient deficiencies, overweight, and obesity are increasing, and is something from which no country is immune. The fiscal and social costs alone are simply too large for any country's policymakers to ignore. Hunger is also on the rise, with 690 million people chronically undernourished, according to the last SOPHI report, and as many as 130 million more have been pushed into hunger because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And even these figures are likely out of date. But 2 billion people suffer from micronutrient deficiencies. We know overweight and obesity are on the rise, which increases the risk for non-communicable diseases. And sadly, 3 billion people cannot afford a healthy diet. So this is where the CFS voluntary guidelines come in. To help reverse these trends, countries need policies and actions to transform their food systems, to deliver healthy diets and improve nutrition while protecting biodiversity and their environments. So our guidelines aim to support countries and others to develop multi-sectoral national policies, laws, programs, and investment plans for healthy diets through sustainable food systems, promoting policy coherence and reducing policy fragmentation between relevant sectors like food, health, environment, education, and others, many others. Our guidelines, adopted February 2021, just a few months earlier, occurs amid increased attention by the global community on the links between food, health and nutrition, and the environment, adding to the excellent work already done in the context of the SDGs, ICN2 back in 2014, the UN Decade of Action on Nutrition, and the ongoing work around the UN Food Systems Summit and the UN, or rather the Nutrition for Growth Summit, which we expect later this year. These all provide guidance on policies and interventions to address malnutrition in all its forms through a holistic food systems perspective that considers food systems in their totality and looks at the multidimensional causes of malnutrition. So the process, how we developed the voluntary guidelines. The guidelines resulted from an inclusive multi-stakeholder consultation and negotiation process. They were informed by the scientific evidence of report number 12 of the CFS high-level panel of experts. And this goes back to, I believe, the original request in 2015, then resulted in this report number 12 in 2017. And we got down to serious negotiations last year and finished early this year, as noted. So this product was consulted and negotiated with hundreds of representatives from governments, UN agencies, civil society and private sector, financial and research institutions, and others that took part in preparatory meetings in Europe, Africa, Asia, Near East, Latin America, and North America. And so a big thanks to everyone here who had a hand in the hard work that finished, that resulted in the guidelines in February. So why are these guidelines unique? Now, the guidelines are a relevant tool in the hands of policymakers and development practitioners to raise the importance of the health dimension across different sectors. They recognize interlinkages between sustainable food systems and healthy diets. They call for interventions within and across food systems and their constituent elements. That includes food supply chains, food environments, consumer behavior, to enhance the livelihoods, health, and well-being of populations. They encourage sustainable food production and responsible consumption of diverse and nutritious foods to enable healthy diets, while protecting and promoting sustainable use of natural resources, biodiversity, and ecosystems, while supporting mitigation and adaptation to climate change. They also present agreed multilateral text on key concepts for the first time, such as on healthy and unhealthy diets, nutritious foods, food systems, and sustainable food systems. They're broken down into 7 thematic areas on the screen in front of you. And these are also available in a 2-page summary document available on the front page of the CFS website. If you wish to have those, perhaps the team can put those in chat. But the guidelines provide a framework to promote policy coherence and coordination, and again, bringing together various actors involved in food systems. So the voluntary guidelines have 7 focus areas. You can read the titles, everything from supply chains to humanitarian context. And so I urge you to read them if you've not read them already, be familiar with them, and most importantly, help us to implement the voluntary guidelines. The CFS is the Secretariat, and the members here in Rome finalize the products. But what is really key is promoting their awareness and implementation at country, regional, local, city level, wherever you may be. And we rely on the kindness of strangers mostly to make sure that these negotiated documents are tools that are used by policymakers in the context they find themselves in. So we don't finish with the approval. Obviously, we need to promote them. This is what we're doing with WHO. We're doing similar things with the WTO, the World Bank, and many other of our key constituents and stakeholders within the CFS family. So there is a full chapter on implementation in the guidelines. And so we need all CFS stakeholders to support and promote amongst their constituencies. So with that, in closing, I'll thank the WHO again, our close friends who with whom we work so well and so closely, and to everybody that's played a role in getting us to this point, which is the implementation and promotion stage. So again, thank you very much, and we look forward to answering your questions.
Indeed. Many thanks, Chris, for synthesizing work that took 5+ years of intense negotiations into a couple of minutes. But we'll pick it up from where you stopped, thanking our colleagues at WHO for their support and their kindness in helping us to promote the guidelines, and especially as they apply to promoting healthy diets and through sustainable food systems. And to tell us a little more about this is Francesco Branca, who's the Director, Department of Nutrition and Food Safety at the World Health Organization. Francesco, the floor is yours.
Weganjo and Chris, absolutely a pleasure to work with your team. It's been a very interesting time, the development of this voluntary guidelines, and we have been working as part of UN Nutrition to make this happen. And again, thanks Ambassador Hagedorn for having coordinated us so effectively. I mean, these things are difficult to negotiate. But I must say that this story starts many years ago, really, and it's been a process. It's been a very important learning process, which we are really thankful to the Committee of Food Security for having hosted. This started when Gerda Verburg was the chair of the CFS. But it started, I think, when we had a discussion over the second International Conference of Nutrition. So we see these guidelines really as an important contribution to the UN Decade of Action on Nutrition. We're now in the preparation of the Food System Summit. So as WHO, we've been reflecting about the impact of food systems on health. And I think we're basically concluding that there are many pathways, and we've learned, particularly this year during the COVID pandemic, how there is such a complex interaction between health and food system, and also how much food systems are vulnerable. And so we need to strengthen them. We've saying that basically there are 5 pathways of interaction. One is unhealthy diets and food insecurity that have impact on multiple forms of malnutrition. And I think the dietary, the guidelines are really considering this as front and center. But we're also considering that growing, harvesting, transforming of food exposes food workers to occupational hazard. So we need to be concerned about their health. COVID-19 and food workers. I mean, crops left in the fields without being grown, transporters who would get sick, and people in supermarkets. Clearly, and of course, people in the meat industry, the health of the food workers is so important. Third, the unsafe animal production practices, or the opportunities for wild animals to come closer to humans. Wildlife being pushed to human ecosystems, and then the infectious diseases being amplified by intensive farming practices, but also the way that our intensive food production practices use, for example, antibiotics and can lead to antimicrobial resistance. The agricultural practices that can lead to the pollution of soil, air, and water, the way we dispose inappropriately of waste, and finally, unsafe food. So all of this requires comprehensive action. And I think the voluntary guidelines have been able to speak to many of these pathways. And really, I'd like to highlight section 3 that presents recommendation on improving nutrition and health of farm and food system workers, or recommendation on equal and equitable access to healthy diets through sustainable food system, and then food safety across sustainable food systems. So all these multiple dimensions are really addressed. But now we have this broad menu, and the guidelines are voluntary. So what is really needed is provide the necessary support to member states and partners to take actions. So here I'd like to renew the commitment of WHO to help countries make their choices in a wise way. And I remember during the negotiation many times, countries saying, okay, but where's the evidence? Tell us, give us the examples. And I think this is an important, contribution that we can give. Continue exchanging information. Actually, we're learning from the experience of member states, and we're only somehow brokering these collaborations and explaining that certain action that is contained in the voluntary guidelines, is actually effective, and there are good examples and there are good tools to implement it. And I just would like to mention some. The guidance and tools for public food procurement and services, all the discussion around food reformulation, elimination of trans fat, reduction of sugar and salt, price policies, regulation on marketing of foods and beverages, including breast milk substitutes, labeling, particularly the front of the pack labeling, food fortification, food safety, food control systems, and guidelines for the use of antimicrobials in food production. So we have really an important role in making these guidelines known, explaining them when necessary, and helping countries make their choices and make their prioritization. We'll probably be helping a lot of that by producing WHO evidence-based guidelines and recommendations. This will feed in this process of support country planning. We all have the same goal, to provide universal access to safe and healthy diets through building forward sustainable food systems. So we have great opportunity here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Francesco. And we'll now move to Gerda. Gerda, I know you have to leave a couple of minutes late for the next engagement, so the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Oregano. And it's a pleasure to be here because it's an important meeting. And for this reason, I would like to applaud the Committee on World Food Security, very dear to me, very close to my heart, but also WHO for being there, including also representing the whole UN nutrition, that is the UN network for SUN as well. I would like to make a few remarks because it's important to focus on the food side of the food systems. There is a lot of emphasis on the sustainability side, the climate side, if you want, and the sustainable production of food. But the focus on the health of people and the nutrition of people is a crucial one. To give you one number, and I've seen this number and I was even more impressed by it, though I knew it. The hidden cost of our current food systems worldwide, when it comes to the health and well-being of people, is $30 trillion per year. $30 trillion per year. Now, can you imagine of making this business case if you improve food systems and you focus on the health and nutrition of people provided by healthy and affordable and accessible and tasty food, then you can prevent 30 trillion. So break it down in numbers. And I know there are two focal points of the Sun movement speaking here. If they can make the business case, and there will be support to do this to their own government, you have a clear investment case in why you should invest in improved food systems. My second remark is on the importance of the voluntary guidelines. And indeed, it has taken long, but I think they are very helpful. And I would like to praise the CFS for bringing the number of pages down to 2 clear pages. And I can only recommend use the 2-pager as a kind of checklist. Don't go through all the 30-something pages because the language is so complicated. And I know this is due to negotiations. I've been in it myself. but a breaking down in a kind of checklist. What do we need to take care of if we are to improve our food systems in our own country, focusing on where we are and from where we come and where we want to go, could be very helpful. And then if you need to have the evidence or the source, you will be able to sort it out in the bigger document. So I can only recommend it. And as Sun Movement, we are providing every country with this checklist because it could be helpful. However, there is one in the invitation of this for this event. There seems to be a focus on developing countries. And I think this is a mistake. I think it's not a mistake, but it should be broadened, because there is no country around the world that has no problem with food systems. In many so-called developed countries, the food system is also disrupting the health, bankrupting the health system. So these voluntary guidelines and the Food System Summit should also include the developed countries, because they have huge and still growing problems, because more than 80% and maybe even more than 90% of all diseases currently are foodborne or food related. My first remark is that at the country level, every country will do it in its own way. And I think CFS could be encouraging the uptake of these voluntary guidelines, also by using the perm reps. Please use the perm reps and the ambassadors. I know many of them will be engaged, but invite them to be a champion for these voluntary guidelines. They know them by heart because all of them have been involved in the negotiations. So it's not just to send a document back to your government or to report how the negotiations have been, but perm reps and ambassadors can be true champions of focusing on food systems, with it's the third crucial topic in the world, and it's the game changer for all sustainable development goal. If we get food systems right, we might be able to gear up and get all sustainable development goals implemented by 2030. My sixth remark is a little bit reflecting on Francesco Branca. The nutrition in food production is of immense importance. Workers need good food, but I would like to broaden this. I would like to make a strong plea here for workforce nutrition as such. In those countries like Japan and Indonesia, where we have seen companies providing workers with food, with healthy nutrition, with maternity leave, and with decent opportunities for breastfeeding for those women who have given birth, they don't care about the cost, because they say it's an investment. It's an investment in happy and healthy people. It's an investment in productivity. It's an investment in not losing people because they want to stay, because they're extremely proud, especially if you also involve the families of these workers. So workforce nutrition as such. The other remark I would like to make here is on what should be chosen at the country level. And I agree with Francesco in general on many of the issues. I would also like to add that most countries are busy with the implementation of universal health coverage. And there, the focus on prevention of malnutrition could also play an important role, because in the end, all we want to do is to prevent rather than curate problems. Finally, my suggestion would be for the CFS to consider broadening the mechanisms. Right now, you have the civil society mechanism, all people coming from food production, and at the same time, the private sector mechanism. Consider to broaden it, to bring in more partners from the different angles of food systems, because one thing is clear, if the Food System Summit is becoming a success, and we're all working very hard to it, it means that the siloed approach of the different issues, climate, biodiversity, food security, nutrition, health, should all be broken down and should also all play their own part in the important puzzle that is called food systems to serve people and planet alike. So with these remarks, I go back to you, Waigano, and I was happy, and it's always an honor to join these events. Important. Thanks.
Thank you, Gerda. The pleasure is always ours. It's really indeed a privilege to have a friend, a steadfast friend in you and the Sun movement. And I must add, which you didn't, I think you're too modest, that the Sun movement has deployed its network to get the voluntary guidelines out to all the countries where you have presence. And we thank you and your team for that work, Gerda. And you mentioned about getting the guidelines implemented at the country level. And the next speaker will give us a bit of a flavor of what's happening in Ethiopia. And this is none other than Fereo Lema, who's an advisor, Office of the State Minister, Ministry of Health of Ethiopia, and he's the Sun government focal point. Fereo, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Because of connectivity, I'm going to not put my video on if it's okay. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having us and being engaged. I think this year, I think in the context of Nutrition Year of Action and working also towards the UN Food System Summit, what we have done, I think, is in alignment with the voluntary guideline. And actually, in terms of the processes, it started in January. And in January, we had a background paper for all purposes. And this, at the core of our background paper of Ethiopian food system, we had a nutrient-dense, diet-centered approach to inform the needed delivery of better nutrition and health for all Ethiopians, looking at or leveraging and aligning partnership with across the different actors so that sustainable healthy diets become an outcome in terms of transforming the Ethiopian food system. And I think that background paper was presented to our high-level roundtable, which was led by ministers, where also Gerda and a lot of our UN partners were engaged. At that high-level roundtable of ministers, we were given the guide, the go-ahead and recommendations. And based on that, we had a couple of dialogues in March and May. And I think the whole consultative process took an information from multiple stakeholders, private sector, a little bit of subnational level, not enough, not very much, but from youth sides. And the whole actions were prioritized to be taken into most catalytic for the Ethiopian context. And I think all in all, the process, now we see it, the approach had the guideline as well as the focus areas that's being addressed by the UN food system have been embedded into the whole process of the Ethiopian food system transformation. And I'll raise some of the challenges and what we are suggesting as game changers. But in addition, I think our focus is to focus on what we do at the country level rather than talking about global agendas or priorities. We are looking and focusing on priorities at the national level, because that is needed to address the whole issue. And I think some of the challenges that go together with the voluntary guideline we have identified are, I think, production diversity as well as productivity in terms of nutrient-dense foods is quite very low in Ethiopia. Only 2.4% of adults in Ethiopia consume fruits and vegetables as needed. And also there is a big enhancing the need of agricultural livelihoods in a sustainable way is quite important because of the issue of resilience and shock in climate issues. There is a big issue of accessibility and affordability of nutritious diet in Ethiopia. Only 26% or 86 million people in Ethiopia do not afford nutritious diets. That is 74% of the whole households nationally. And that is what we've also found. The big issue again, which was also raised by my colleagues, is food safety, as well as post-harvest loss, which is very high also in Ethiopia. And cultural and traditional practices which need to be modified, and indigenous staples are not being used is one of the areas that determine what we eat. And I think there is a lot of cultural and religious practices. We fast 260 days in Ethiopia from a year. And you can imagine what that means in terms of securing and consuming animal source foods. And I think some of the examples as solutions being identified, we are finalizing our ideas and moving to a position paper, but also a roadmap beyond the summit is a governance issue. The governance, as it was being raised, is a big issue. And we have now a food and nutrition policy in Ethiopia, which came out 2018. And a couple of weeks ago, we have a food and nutrition strategy that was endorsed by our national coordination body. And that includes most of these. And I think the governance should be strengthened to work across sectors as well as both vertical and horizontal, and there is a big need. There is also a big need of capacity, education, and information in terms of that, and we think there is a need of a social movement kind of thing that not only focus on social behavior change, but also practices and working with our cultural and traditional leaders. And the other important issue is production of diversified foods, particularly in terms of nutrient-dense foods, to have the majority of the food basket. And in terms of that, there is a need to focus on how our smallholder farmers are managing their land and how climate sensitive that is, because the smallholder farmers have quite high greenhouse gas emissions as well. So there is a need to address that, to also have a sustainable production practices to ensure more diverse and nutrient foods are available. And also in terms of existing innovations that we have looked at is the green revolution we are doing. We do around, for the last 3 years, 4 to 6 billion trees are planted in Ethiopia annually. And half of that is becoming 20%, 30% of it is becoming fruits and vegetable trees. And I think if you could scale up that, it could work on climate as well as sustainability and also address the diet diversity issue. And I think we have also, as most of you know, the Sequota Declaration, which we are focusing on in terms of scaling up from 40 to 700 districts starting next year. And I think in general, from a country perspective, I think we see the voluntary guideline represents a very useful and important tool to help us design a Ethiopian food system transformation. And I think it also helps us to engage and convince policymakers and development partners to work on that, and especially moving beyond the food system summit we are developing a roadmap to attain our UN Decade of Action for Nutrition as well as the SDGs. And those guidelines is giving us directives and ways to go in a local or countrywide way to transform the Ethiopian food system. I think there's something for everyone to do using these guidelines from production to consumption, as well as everything in between. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Farrell. That's good to hear. That's the hope we had when developing the voluntary guidelines that will be used at the national level. Before we go to the last panelist of the day, I would also like to mention, if you have any question, please post it on Q&A. We might not be able to respond to many of them, but we will certainly respond to them and post them on the CFS website. So ask your questions. And now allow me to invite Mary Mpere, who is joining us all the way from Ghana to give us perspectives from our country, utilizing the voluntary guidelines. Mary, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I hope you can hear me.
We hear you already, Mary.
I would like to say up front that I am not a nutritionist and I am more of a social development person and a planner. And so I tend to look at things through those lenses as well. And I have looked, I am here because I'm interested in this guidelines. I thought that it was a very useful tool for policymakers. For us policymakers, anything that will help you achieve your objective is very useful. And I also thought that it was a timely and comprehensive resource, especially now that we are running the UN food systems dialogues and we are seeking transformative pathways for sustainable and equitable food systems. It sort of sets the context for looking at nutrition within a food systems approach, which is very interesting and useful. The objectives are quite comprehensive and wide in scope. setting both the context for prioritization of nutrition within food systems, as I said earlier on. I particularly like the contextualization in terms of the key normative frameworks that we should be looking at. Of course, we know some of them are very, common, ICN to SDGs to WHO targets and others. And I think that looking at the attempt at policy coherence at the global level gives us a lot of hope, that we can also do same at a national level. Because sometimes the divisions at global level also impact on our ways, our work as well, especially in terms of reporting. And I like also the wide expanse of stakeholders that were looked at. The simple message here is that this agenda concerns everybody. The focus on implementation, particularly on capacity building, financing, importance of governance and accountability systems, I thought was also very good. I like its voluntary nature as well, because governments have no appetite for too many reporting requirements. I noticed a few things, and forgive me if I am wrong, but I thought I should mention them. It was interesting to see that, for instance, gender equality and women's empowerment, were actually highlighted in this document. And we are doing same for the dialogues that we are running in Ghana, because obviously they are very important groups. But in the normative frameworks that were outlined, I was surprised not to find anything on them. My assumption is that these documents probably have the mainstream, but it would have been good to follow it up with that as well. The focus on resilience and the humanitarian issues are very important, because thanks to COVID, in Ghana, we are also working on our next medium-term development policy framework, which I have the privilege of coordinating. And we had to find an exclusive place for emergency planning and response, especially because of the dislocations in food supply chains by COVID. And also, I thought that the SDG principle of leaving no one behind, and then the issue of social protection should have received probably more mention. I haven't seen it, but more mention if it is there. And I thought that the whole issue of rights, starting with the rights to food and all the other labor and other rights, maybe should have been part of the guiding principles as well. Having said that, I would like to reiterate that yes, this is very useful for policymakers, and I see a possible use as a resource material that we can all fall upon. Advocacy together talked about making a business case for focusing on dealing with malnutrition through the food systems lens, for instance, sensitization and mobilization of all key stakeholders so that they will see themselves in the picture. I also see it as reinforcing a lot of what is already going on in Ghana, but beyond that, helps us to also ascertain some policy gaps and fill them. For instance, in seeking broad multi-stakeholder understanding and agreement for coordination, it is important for all stakeholders to see themselves in the picture. So if I do not get the total picture, chances are that you will not get optimum participation. So in that regard, I think it's very, very important. I've already said that it's timely because of the ongoing dialogues and the preparation of our commitment paper. We do have, in Ghana, however, we do have a certain history of not focusing only on guidelines, because guidelines have a general limitation as far as, operationalizing or implementing them are concerned. They are pointers to what ought to be, but not the how to, especially in the face of a myriad of capacity and implementation challenges. The how to is very, very important. So for instance, in Ghana, we are investing in the development of a food and nutrition security toolkit, which we must now re-examine in the face of the paradigm shift that we are experiencing here, especially due to the Food System Summit and then the guidelines that we now have access to, we think that the conceptual frameworks are important in seeking policy coherence or even integration. We already have a lot that for instance, we're looking at the UNICEF framework. We work within the SUN framework as well, SUN theory of change, you know, and all of that. Even within food systems, there are several models. Which one is optimum is one of the questions we asked ourselves as a country when we started thinking through what to do for the dialogues, for instance. So these are some of the things that are thrown up, some of the questions that are thrown up whenever you are confronted with a new resource that seems to, of course, purport a shift in paradigm. And so that's something that we have to address ourselves to as we look at this, these guidelines. We have always had a challenge between national systems and donor systems, which have had a tendency of undermining coordination, for instance. And therefore, I was very happy that time was spent on looking at the capacity of donors as well. I'm not too sure whether that is enough to correct those instances where reluctance to abide by country systems. And I really want to put this in the right context. I'm
afraid I request that you wrap up. We have just about 3 minutes and a couple of questions.
Okay, thank you very much. And then I was surprised that given all the role of the SUN movement, I didn't see much in terms of, I didn't see it mentioned. So I don't know whether it was. Probably I didn't have time to locate that. But I think that we also need to, we also built on it as a country. We built on the SUN networks that we have, even expand the dialogues that we are having. And therefore going forward, even maintaining those dialogues would require that we continue with that. And so I think it's always good to keep that in perspective. My conclusion will be that even with the guidelines, we'll still need to do further analytical work. For instance, we are undertaking a landscape analysis, looking at the policy gaps, and then making sure that we actually fill them, especially now that we are looking at broad national objectives to be obtained under the food systems paradigm. And would like to take this opportunity to thank the CFS for giving us food for thought and really challenging us to look again at what we are doing so that we can all have better outcomes. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Mary, for sharing perspectives from Ghana. Excellencies, colleagues, we have just about 1 minute to go. We'll beg your indulgence if we overshoot it by 2-3 more minutes. I'll take 3 questions and I'll direct them. The first 2 will go to Chris, Secretary CFS. The first one is from Namukolo, and they're asking, how is CFS ensuring that the strategic directions set in the voluntary guidelines are not lost in the UNFSS process? Another question tied to that is that there are serious fears that the increase, and this is from Marcos Arana, increasing the number of people at risk of hunger in the world due to COVID-19 pandemic will be an incentive for the expansion of industrial agriculture. This orientation may jeopardize the continuity of traditional agro-ecosystems, as well as putting sustainability, the importance of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and human rights-based approach on the back burner. What provisions is the CFS taking to prevent the Food System Summit from leaning towards technical measures that prioritize increased production over these issues? The next question is for Freo, and people are grateful for sharing your perspectives from Ethiopia. And the question is whether there are any policy priorities to promote healthy diets at country level, for example, labeling, reformulation, marketing restrictions, etc., and whether the civil society has played a role in development of the national policy and strategy, and if so, what role? The last question, and I'm glad to see Ambassador Hans Hugevin joining us, is to you, Ambassador Hugevin. which is what are the next steps in terms of utilizing these guidelines, especially using the summit, the UNFSS, as a springboard. And as I take those questions, I'll start with you, Chris, then come to Ferrero, and finally Ambassador Hugavin. It's just to let you all know that you have posted a new question on Mentimeter on how you plan to utilize these guidelines at the national level. Head over there, Martin will post the code and the link for you to respond to that question. Thank you, Chris.
Thanks, Waigajo. Good questions. I do want to emphasize that since we have a limited time, that we will try to answer questions received in written format and post them on the CFS website. Hopefully our WHO colleagues can help with that as well. And glad to see Hans here. Thank you for joining us. And again, congratulations for all the hard work that took. So the questions, just quickly, you said, how does CFS assure that its hard work is not lost in the UN Food Systems Summit process? And I think it's a very good one, and I think it's one we are constantly looking at. We started as a committee in 1974. We started in a global food crisis. We were reformed in 2009 during another crisis. We've been around, we will stay around. The summit will come and go. Our products are here to last, and we are here to remain the UN's unique platform for policy coordination and multi-stakeholder debate and discussion and policy convergence around SDG 2. So of course, food systems are quite broad, include everything from water, health, gender, land. So it's, as stated earlier by another speaker, when we get food systems right, we will get the 17 SDG goals right. And without it, we will have a hard time reaching those goals. So the CFS is engaged in the summit, and we're also ready to continue to promote the products that we have and promote the process, the platform, the science policy interface through the HLPE that we have. And again, we will be here a long time and look forward to much more support and collaboration with others. The other question was about hunger and COVID going up and industrial ag. Now, these are issues we just dealt with in another policy convergence process where we developed policy recommendations on innovative approaches. And I highly recommend you read the report from the CFS high-level panel of experts, which preceded this, because it gets into the spectrum of approaches that countries or regions or even localities are taking, everything from an agroecological approach to more intensive farming approaches. And this is up to countries and localities to decide in hopefully a multi-stakeholder manner, what is the best approach? How are those trade-offs between different policy choices addressed? And what are the long-term goals to make their food production sustainable, including the impacts on health, human health and animal health, on water, soil, air. These are all the things that factor into the complexity of the CFS Voluntary Guidelines. And there is a lot of focus on whether industrial ag is the right way forward. How do you do what Sri Lanka is doing and ban the imports of synthetic fertilizers and still keep food production growing? It's been shown to be doable in certain parts of India and elsewhere, but these are the debates that have to be had using science, using traditional knowledge, using the evidence that is in the heads and the hands of those working the land. So back to you, Waiganjo.
Thank you, Chris, and I pass the mic to Ferrero. Over to you, Ferrero, for the question on what policy areas have you prioritized in Ethiopia?
I think can you hear me?
We hear you all right.
Thank you. I think there are 2 things or 3 things I want to mention. In terms of the proclamation on healthy diet guidelines and things like that, I think there is 2 processes. One is we are currently developing a food-based dietary guideline for the whole of Ethiopia that would help in terms of identifying areas that need to be communicated and to have accessible as well as nutritious food, diverse food consumption. So we have that being developed and will be out. I think the Ethiopian Political Institute with Agriculture for Nutrition and Health, IFPRI, with Dr. Namakolo and colleagues within the Ethiopian Public Health Institute are working on that, and it will come out. The baseline assessment and others have been done, and we are formulating the guideline. The second one related to non-communicable disease is a proclamation is coming out on restricting trans fat, salt, and iodine, potassium kind of salt kind of activities, and the proclamation is being done and coming out. So it helps to reduce unhealthy diets in terms of marketing, labeling, as well as issues concerned with, because in urban areas, the issue of non-communicable disease is very high and is almost killing 52% of the adults, and those kind of things are being focused. And I think the whole idea of the partners working with on the food system are also looking at what can be done to improve access. All actors need to work across the food system to improve the healthy and nutritious diets. And I think it's everybody's business, and that's the problem is whose responsibility it is. And I think everybody needs to come in to work on that. But I think in terms of strategy and policy, yes, a lot of development partners, civil society organizations, as well as government sectors across were engaged to develop. And I think we went into 10 areas, 10 drafts for the whole system to develop a policy and a strategy, food and nutrition strategy. So everybody was engaged, and I think contributed a lot from the beginning until we developed the strategy and launched it, endorsed it a couple of weeks ago. Over.
Thank you, Ferrero. Ambassador Hubevin, please bring it home for us with a question on the next steps.
Thank you very much. And it's an honor and pleasure to be with you again. And I think the Committee on World Food Security should be very proud of the results of the negotiations on the voluntary guidelines. Of course, it was based on long hours of negotiation, but when you look to the substance of the guidelines, I think there's so much in it. And the guidelines are directed to governments, but also to the private sector, to stakeholders, to the science, to academia, civil society, NGOs. And they are very concrete. And when I look to the action tracks of the World Food System Summit, and you compare that with the guidelines are there to be implemented. There are very concrete guideline suggestions for governments, for private sector, civil society to implement. And of course, that's the most important next step. I think we should be proud of the result, but the challenge is starting now, how to implement it at the national level. I think with the whole process of the World Food System Summit, we have an excellent momentum to start implementing it at the national level. Of course, we have the national dialogues in the preparation of the World Food System Summit. I think they can be brought in already in those dialogues, because I think for the implementation, it's not only up to the government, but we need to do it shoulder to shoulder with the private sector, with civil society, with the academia, etc. And we can only do it as we do it together at the national level with national platforms. And with the country dialogues, we have them now in many countries. Secondly, we have the pre-summit, which will be held here at the end of July here in Rome for advocating, I would say, the implementation of more sustainable food systems. And I think the guidelines should be prominently there in the outcome of those discussions at the pre-summit. But more important, I think we will have the World Food System Summit. That is the momentum to advocate and to find political commitment for the implementation of the guidelines. Political commitment, of course, within the UN, but certainly with our heads of states, our ministers, our governments to implement, but also with the CEOs of the companies, also with the CEOs of civil society or the leaders of civil society, also with the CEOs of institutions like universities, like the academia. We need them all to implement, and we should use that momentum. But it's clear if you walk through the guidelines, they are so concrete and well developed and well stated that you have to implement it. You must get the appetite to implement, to look to your partners and go implement it. And I think it's important that, of course, that we monitor the implementation, that we learn the success stories of the implementation at the national level. And last week, we had a meeting organized by the World Benchmarking Alliance, also to monitor not only what the governments are doing, because that is CFS is doing that mostly, but also the World Benchmark Alliance, how the private sector is doing it, and to advocate for those private sectors who are doing their utmost to implement it. And we should do it for the same for academia and civil society. We have to roll up our sleeves, start working on the implementation at the national level, in national dialogues, shoulder to shoulder. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Ambassador Hugavin, and once again for not only the remarks, but for steering the process of negotiating the guidelines. Colleagues, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, that's all we have time for this morning, this afternoon, and we thank you for your indulgence.
Can we, hey, Waiganjo, sorry to interrupt. Can we give Francesco a final word, given
Absolutely.
the importance of our relationship with WHO and all the work that they do?
Indeed, Francesco.
Thank you very much, Chris and Waiganjo. I think this has been a very interesting and rich discussion, particularly because we have the feeling that this is a good tool for moving things ahead. I mean, in the past, I think we have suffered the challenge of not having an internationally agreed and negotiated tool. I mean, even during the Second International Conference of Nutrition, we had a framework for action, which was only partially accepted by the member state. It was entirely voluntary, and now the guidelines are something more established and giving us the opportunity to provide that kind of support to member state that it is needed. I think it's going to be still very important to work with the regional teams, as was suggested by Bibi. Work with the country teams to help making the right choices around these voluntary guidelines. But we hope that the Committee of Food Security, Chris, will be also the opportunity to follow up on the implementation of the guidelines. I think this is part of the my power, if I recall correctly. The program of work. So because I think what will reinforce the implementation is understanding that this is actually being used and it's producing the impact required. I think we need to do that. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and goodbye to all.
Thank you, Francesco, and once again, grateful to have had the opportunity to be part of the WHO Health Talks. The conversation continues. If you have any question, please get in touch with us at cfs@fao.org. Mentimeter will remain open. Please give us your thoughts, suggestions on how we can utilize these guidelines at the national level. Until next time, it's bye-bye from us at the Committee on World Food Security. Thank you.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you to Mary and Faru and Hans, Francesco. Appreciate your time and expertise.
Thank you very much.